What is the maximum number of points that can be scored in a single NFL game? We will attempt to answer that question. What is the maximum number of points that will be scored in an NFL game? Perhaps we received a clue on September 24th, 2023. We knew the Dolphins had a powerful offense, but I doubt anyone expected the 35-13 lead they hold over the Broncos at halftime. Dolphins coach Mike McDaniel keeps his foot on the gas in the third quarter, going for it on 4th and goal from the 1 to punch it in and extend the lead to 42-13. Soon after, star quarterback Tua Tagovailoa continues to ruin the Broncos' day with another long touchdown drive. Seconds later, an interception gives the Dolphins the ball right back with a short field, and suddenly we've got a score of 56-13 with about 15 minutes still left to play. In this line of work, as in most others, greatness can be mistaken for rudeness. Likely motivated in equal parts by decorum and an interest in protecting his starters from injury, Coach McDaniel now calls off the Dogs, sending in backup quarterback Mike White and journeyman receiver Robbie Chosen. Neither get to play much, both would love to score, and the Broncos starters are by this point only on the field in the physical sense. On 3rd and 10, Chosen easily fakes out Patrick Surtain, and with no safety help available, he runs it in. The extra point gives Miami 63 points. That was the last pass play McDaniel is going to dial up today. Now clearly motivated exclusively by a reluctance to run up the score, he has White feed the ball to rookie Devon Achane. On 1st down, he's making guys miss. On 2nd down, he cuts through a huge opening and takes it all the way to the house. Dolphins 70, Broncos 20. This is now one of just 4 games in which a team scored at least 70 points across all of NFL history. The CBS broadcast notes that this is the first such game in 57 years, which is actually underselling it. As of this afternoon, September 24th, 2023, including this game and the games in progress playing out across the country as we speak, there have been 17,412 NFL regular season and postseason games. And again, in just 4 of them, a team has scored 70+. Game number 1,438, the 1940 NFL Championship, which the Bears won 73-zip, remains the single-game record. In game number 2,184, the 1950 Rams won 70-27. Game number 3,895, played in 1966, was a 72-41 Washington victory. So this 4th 70-plus effort we're enjoying today is indeed removed by 57 years, but also, since far more games have been played in the league's modern era, by more than 3/4 of the league's game-by-game history. These Miami Dolphins, who again sit at exactly 70 points right now, have a chance to break or at least tie the single-game record of 73. This is an opportunity that nobody ever gets. There's no bad blood here. Quite the opposite, actually. McDaniel grew up near Denver and was a big fan of the Broncos, who later gave him his first job in pro football. He's been trying to ease up on the scoring today. The Broncos defense just won't let him. Given the ball back with 4 minutes left, he continues running, but this time with backup running back Chris Brooks. Brooks is an undrafted rookie who wasn't even expected to make the team and had never taken an NFL handoff until today. On his second touch this series, he cuts left, weaves right, takes advantage of lackluster Denver tackling, and chugs 52 yards upfield. This puts the Dolphins inside the Broncos 30. Miami fans begin chanting, "We want more." If the Dolphins can score another touchdown, they'll sit at 76 points, probably 77 after the extra point. Either total, of course, would break the record. Facing 3rd and long, the chants grow louder.
As much as I don't think you should go for the field goal and the points, I have a feeling that they will try and set the record.
Brooks is stopped to at least set up a very makeable field goal. This would tie the all-time record. Kicker Jason Sanders has put his helmet on and is standing at the ready, suggesting that McDaniel is really thinking about it. But now, he gazes through transition lenses and into the abyss. The pros and cons Mike McDaniel is wrestling with at present, as far as I can figure them to be, are laid out here. A couple are based on reasons he will later give, the rest are conjecture on my part. First, the case for attempting the field goal. He would, of course, tie the all-time NFL single-game scoring record. There's a certain type of football coach who's especially enamored with the history of the game, the Bill Belichick type of guy, and the relatively introspective, deliberate McDaniel does seem like the type. He surely would appreciate the chance to make history, but in the passive sense, that history would be made rather than that he specifically would be the one making it. He also surely knows that teams never get the chance he has in front of him right now, but he might not know how never. This is every time a team has ever been able to come within 14 points of 73. It's been well over half a century since any team has had an opportunity anything like the one now presented these Dolphins. Kicking through the uprights would also present the possibility, however small, of a material and enormous benefit. If at season's end 2 teams are tied atop their division standings, the league resorts to tie-breaking procedures. If the first 4 tiebreakers don't resolve things, overall strength of victory would come into play. It almost never comes to that, and even then, 3 points are pretty unlikely to make the difference. But a scenario exists in which they could, and so McDaniel can honestly claim it's in his team's best interest to kick this football. And then there are these Dolphins fans. They haven't seen their team win a single playoff game since 2001. They do not get very many moments like this. Either in spite of or because of that, they're still here. Nobody's left. Everyone wants this. Surely they deserve it. Now, the case against. McDaniel worries that after months of emphasizing playoff success, making a detour to chase regular season glory would undercut his message to his team. It's a long season, and there is not a very strong correlation between teams that blow out an opponent in Week 3 and teams that win the Super Bowl. On the opposite sideline is Sean Payton, an NFL institution who's one of the longest tenured head coaches in the league. McDaniel, though well respected, is in his second season as head coach. Everything about this clobbering up to this point can be easily forgiven. McDaniel has done it all the right way, pulling his starters and sticking with the run. But kicking here might brand him, fair or not, as a disrespectful, overeager tryhard. That brings narratives, talk show fodder, distractions that can do nothing to help his team. Finally, there is the question of karma, which he explicitly identifies after the game. Maybe he's speaking strictly in terms of sportsmanship here, but it's tempting to imagine him staring into this abyss and seeing the supernatural meet his gaze. Even tying the record at 73 would plant his toes at the precipice, and ultimately, he declines to do so. The kicker unstraps his helmet. The crowd rains down boos on their own team's victory formation.
Respect to the game, respect to the players.
Mike McDaniel averts his gaze and turns his back on history. Final score, Dolphins 70, Broncos 20. Is this it? Is this as far as an NFL team will go? What if the limit is imposed not by physical ability or tactical genius or sound or light or anything material, but by manners? There are 2,516 scores on this Scorigami board. 1,091 of them have been achieved at least once. 1,425 of them, that's about 56% of them, have never been seen in the NFL. Which means that even if the entire NFL, from the commissioner to the 55th player on every roster, made it their sole and explicit mission starting today to register every last unseen score and flip this board to 100% green, it would coincidentally take them exactly 5 seasons. A 5-year plan to equalize distribution. I don't think the NFL is Soviet enough for that. The first 3 chapters of this story have been dedicated to the scores that have happened. This final chapter is primarily set aside for those that have not. Alex and I will examine unachieved scores that are likely enough to happen in any given year in any given game. We'll look at scores that seem a little more out of reach, but might still occur in our lifetimes. We'll survey the likelihood of some of these scores out in the far-flung hinterlands. We will, yes, set our sights into the void, the unmapped and ungovernable territories in which Team A scores more than 73 points and/or Team B scores more than 51. And finally, we will look inward to the staggering, almost cosmic unlikelihood of some of these downtown would-be Scorigami that have been right under our nose this entire time. Including one score, in particular, so unholy, so impossible to imagine, that it would require the utilization of a technically legal, yet also forbidden type of score, one so bewildering that we tremble to speak its name aloud. This is the probability monolith, or at least that is what it will become. The probability monolith is made up of blocks just like this one. Every block represents one NFL game. There are 200 games this way and 200 games that way. This gives us a grid of 40,000 games. Funny enough, there is no universal consensus on how many NFL games there have been. Depending on your search methods, you can end up with totals that differ by tiny margins. Some record keepers don't acknowledge AAFC games or those old 1920 games in which official league teams played ragtag squads from the local army base or glee club or what have you. We do. The number we have settled on is 17,950, the number officially listed by ProFootballReference.com. The very first game we recognize is this game between the Rock Island Independents and St. Paul Ideals on September 26, 1920. The very most recent game entering the 2025 season is Super Bowl 59, in which my favorite team got to play in the Super Bowl, and then the Eagles destroyed them. I'll leave this collection of every NFL game that has ever happened here as a frame of reference as we use this apparatus to review the odds of some notable scores. We're still going to roll here with our combined odds methodology, which is the odds of Team A ending up with their score multiplied by the odds of Team B ending up with theirs. I will remind you that this is an overly literal interpretation of the numbers to the point of being flawed, as we're about to see when we review the very most common score in NFL history, 20-17. Historically, the odds of scoring exactly 20 points are about 1 in 16, the odds of scoring exactly 17 are about 1 in 14. Multiply those and you get combined odds of about 1 in 233. However, in practice, 20-17s have happened way more often than that. There have been 297 of them, meaning that in reality the odds are about 1 in 60. What accounts for this gulf between the theoretical and the practical in this particular case is the less tangible relationship certain numbers have with one another. Football teams play to the score. Coaches' decisions are obviously heavily influenced by how many points the other team has. One number on the scoreboard can precipitate another. 20 and 17 are one of many examples of a pair of numbers that almost operate as dance partners. Our model does not account for the particulars of that dance. So there's your disclaimer, in case you were hoping to use any of this as betting advice. But hey, if it's any consolation, the instant you've made the decision to bet on Scorigami, you've already lost. It won't surprise you to hear that the vast majority of Scorigami we have on this board carry odds of better than 17,950 to 1, which of course explains why they've happened. But let's explore the inverse of that, huh? What are the likeliest scores that have never happened? The absent and overdue scores that we probably should have seen by now.
There are two unachieved final scores that stand above the rest in terms of expected occurrences. We would have expected 40-31 and 36-23 games to have each happened at least 2.77 times by now. As to the former, there have been a few close calls. Back in '65, the Cowboys beat the Niners 39-31 in what would have figured to be 40-31 had Don Meredith botched only one hold on an extra point try instead of two. Another 3 games figured to scratch the 40-31 itch had late TDs been followed by kicks. One was in Bill Parcells' final regular season game with his Cowboys dropping a 39-31 decision to the Lions when Detroit failed on an obvious 2-point situation up 5. So as many Scorigamis as the advent of the 2-point conversion has facilitated, it's also collected some tax from the Scorigami gods in the form of withholding a few as well. Even if the NCAA produced 40-31s on back-to-back weekends in 2018, as for 36-23, there's one game in particular that I think represents a malfunction in the space-time continuum that clearly was supposed to end 36-23 and didn't. In Week 9 of 2014, the Steelers hold such a lead over the Ravens with the 2-minute warning nigh. Trying to milk away the remaining time, they only need to pick up 1 yard on 3rd down to essentially guarantee this will get locked in as the 36-23 Scorigami. Running back LeGarrette Blount fails to get that yard. No problem, coming out of the 2-minute warning, they reach for the hammer on 4th down to put the final nail in the coffin. The biggest threat right now that could possibly stand in the way of producing the 36-23 Scorigami is Steelers QB Ben Roethlisberger, who at this moment has tossed an absurd 11 touchdowns over his last 2 games to tie that all-time record, lofting a pass downfield to Matt Spaeth, primarily a blocking tight end who only scores about once per season. And he is not inclined to intentionally go down and give up this season's opportunity that doubles as the record breaker for his quarterback. And, sadly, triples as an overdue Scorigami preventer. Ironically, Spaeth made the key play to help give Pittsburgh their crooked number in the first place when he helped turn a flubbed extra point try into a successful fire drill. So Spaeth giveth, and Spaeth taketh away.
20-11 is a score that caught our attention. Yeah, its combined odds are 9,853 to 1, so it really should have happened by now. More fascinating, though, is that each one of its 8 bordering neighbors has been seen multiple times. Some lots and lots and lots of times. Did you ever read the book Watership Down? Me neither. Did you ever watch the movie Watership Down? Yeah, me too. There's a scene in which the rabbits have to cross a road. One of the rabbits, Bigwig, demonstrates that the car, which they call a hoodoo, as fearsome and powerful as it is indifferent to them.
A hoodoo. It runs on it.
The what?
The hoodoo.
It runs on it?
Yeah, faster than we can.
It's dangerous then. Could catch us.
No. It won't take any notice of us at all. I'll show you. Watch this. See? It's not interested.
He could have been sitting 2 feet away or 2 miles away. Same result, same degree of safety. In the year 1920, you could have set your little pet rabbit right here on 2211, and he would have lived more than 100 years despite the hoodoo. 20-10 has happened 124 times, 20-11 has never happened. How?
The fascinating thing about the lack of 2011s isn't just the frequency bona fides possessed by the number 20, as not only does it represent the winning point total of the single most common final score ever, but it's also appeared in a final score more than any other number except 17. Meanwhile, the companion score of 11, while certainly not common, isn't outrageously rare either. Making it even more mystifying is that its eastern neighbor 21 has linked up with 11 4 times, but especially that its western neighbor 19, a number that's been scored less than 1/3 as many times as 20, has been 11's dance partner 5 times. Let's use the NCAA since adopting the modern football scoring system in 1912 as a point of comparison. You'll see college scores in orange here. While upper-level college football has staged a little more than 4 times as many games than has the NFL, it's seen that score 10 times throughout the years. 14-8 and 15-8, which have also never been achieved in the NFL, combined for 51 collegiate occurrences entering 2025, including 8 in 1958 and another 7 in 1961, with 3 on November 4th of 61. Every NFL team combined across every NFL season combined to produce 0.
In all, there are 21 unachieved scores with combined odds shorter than the number of games that have actually been played, but we've left plenty of room in this grid to account for scores that aren't quite ripe yet, but that some of us might well see in our lifetimes. There are 22,050 unplayed games on this grid. With the current number of NFL teams and under the current 17-game schedule and playoff format, we get to see 285 games a year, meaning this grid tops out in the 2102 season 77 years from now. It's a little bit silly to assume that the season length and number of teams will remain static through the end of this century. Commissioner Roger Goodell is already talking about adding an 18th game to the schedule just 4 years after adding a 17th. It seems impossible for players to play football as we know it for many more games than that. More interesting to me is the possibility of expansion, which the NFL hasn't seen since 2002. This is the longest the league has ever gone without adding a team. There are whispers of putting 4 new teams in Europe at some point, but a 1960s-style explosion of teams is vastly unlikely. For one, there's no competitor formidable enough to compel a merger. For another, these decisions are voted on by team owners who want to win Super Bowls, which are more difficult to win the more teams you have. At any rate, we will suppose that from this point forth, NFL seasons will consist of 285 games indefinitely. Now that we're here, it's time to talk about a blank space on the board that SCORIGAMI enthusiasts have been staring at for years.
From 1980 through 2024, StatHead has on record 43 games in which the betting over-under for points scored was exactly 43, in addition to one team being favored over the other by exactly 7 points. This means that, using all of my algebra skills to deduce the two numbers whose sum is 43 and difference is 7, the implied expected outcome for those games was technically 25-18. And yet despite what is technically such an expectation about once per season, none of those 43, or any other game, ended with a 25-18 final score. Its absence through the first 105 plus years of NFL history represents an islet here within a vast ocean of achieved scores. It seems baffling how lonesome it is. No other untouched score is as isolated from another, especially if excluding ties. Plus, when gazing over to its history in college, it was prevalent enough for Kansas to once play such a game, Kansas State to once play such a game, and Kansas State to once play such a game. The counterpoint would be that only one in about 148.3 NFL team games end with exactly 25 points, and one in about 213.7 end with exactly 18 points. That means a given NFL game would have about a 1 in 31,700 chance of ending up 25-18, so with fewer than 18,000 games having been played at the time I write this, that math doesn't exactly amount to stop the presses type stuff. Ipso facto, I suppose one could argue it's both bizarre and totally normal that the league has managed to hopscotch around 25-18 for so long. Only a few other untouched scores live in even close to as much solitude from another. A couple of them result from 2024's dismantling of the Tetris canon, which captured the nearest peers of 32-22 and 32-15. But no other NFL score sticks out like a sore thumb quite like 25-18.
I know we all miss our Tetris canon, the one that stood for ages before suddenly falling apart in 2024, but guess what? There's another ship in the fleet that may eventually become fully operational. The ship at 43-25 is built, it just needs its little tracer bullets to form. If we can just put together a 44-29, 43-30, and 44-32, it'll be nearly identical to the old Tetris canon. How achievable are those three? That last one, 44-32, will be the toughest one of the three to achieve with combined odds of about 60,000 to 1. Its rarity is unsurprising since it requires a 32, a number that formed the backbone of the original Tetris formation on account of how tough it is to get to. In fact, we can't even display 60,000 to 1 on this grid, which maxes out at 40,000. Gotta build a second level. Okie dokie, there's our 44-32 with odds of 59,700 to 1, meaning we won't consider this score to be overdue unless it still hasn't happened by the year 2171. We suddenly find ourselves looking about 150 years into the future, so maybe it's now appropriate to take just a beat and re-examine the load-bearing presupposition here that the NFL of the late 22nd century will look like the NFL we know today. That the parts we have in this drawer right now are the exact same parts that'll be used far into the future. The NFL is a lot less likely to invent a whole new type of score than it is to endlessly fuss around with the scores it's already got. Consider the field goal and extra point. During the league's earliest years, the goalpost was mounted to the goal line. Returning to Figure 1, we can see the considerably large percentage of scores that field goals accounted for in blue. By 1927, players had gotten pretty sick and tired of running into the goalpost, so they ripped them up and planted them behind the end zone. In this time, kickers kinda stunk, so adding 10 yards of distance was a total deal breaker. Field goals instantly became almost as rare as safeties. Then came the 1932 NFL playoff game, which was in every real sense the NFL's championship game. It was a game so unserious that the Portsmouth Spartans, who would soon become the Detroit Lions, played without their star quarterback because he had to go coach a basketball game somewhere. The game was forced indoors due to a blizzard, and since Chicago Stadium wasn't big enough to accommodate a full-size field, they made do with an 80-yard field and stuck the goalpost back on the goal line. The following offseason, a flurry of off-the-wall new rules are proposed in the college game from which the NFL typically takes its cues. Some want to award a point for every first down, which it seems to me would just incentivize teams trying to play catch-up to run out of bounds once they got 10 yards. Others want to add a 12th player to both teams, who doesn't actually get to play. He's just some Poindexter they pull out of math class to run around the field and give helpful advice like he's the Clippy of the 1930s. These proposals sound pretty dumb 100 years later, yeah, but the point is, people were coming up with all kinds of ambitious ideas for improving the game of football. Instead, the NFL looked at that goalpost they had to move to the goal line out of necessity during the previous year's championship and said, let's just leave it there. This laziness could at least be understood if by the field we meant literally one field, as if there was one football field in Nebraska somewhere that every team in America took turns playing on. As it happens, though, the field is an abstract term referring to many football fields, so this created more work, requiring NFL goalposts everywhere to be yanked up and set back down at the front of the end zone, and they stayed there for 41 entire years. In that time, kickers got better and they took advantage of the relative chip shot distance, and by the early 70s, field goals accounted for nearly half of all scoring events. Fans were getting pretty tired of this because field goals are almost always pretty boring. It was clear that the kicking game was a vestigial structure, a holdover that was introduced during the early days of the sport in the 1860s before anybody knew what football actually was. Time to finally get rid of it, right? Nope. Instead, decades after the NFL moved the goalposts up because they wanted more scoring, they now move the goalposts back because they want more scoring. I suspect that the kicking game remains in football today, in large part because the name of the sport has the word foot in it. At any rate, to recap, the goalpost has now been moved from the front of the end zone to the back of the end zone to the front of the end zone, jerking it up and down in frustration like a stuck zipper. Kicking inevitably gets better in the decades to follow, so in '94, the two-point conversion is introduced to replace at least some of those boring extra points with actual fun plays. More decades pass, and the extra point becomes about 99% automatic, but the goalpost is already as far back as it can go, so in 2015, the NFL simply makes the kicker kick from further away on extra point tries. In the future, kickers are just going to keep getting better and better, and the NFL is going to have to figure something else out. Anything to avoid changing the game in a fundamental way. For example's sake, I'd like to formally propose a rule change that's been a hobby horse of mine for a little while now. I think that any player, from any point on the field and in any game situation, should have the option to throw the ball through the uprights for 1 point. If they miss, it's an incompletion, next down. If they make it, they kick off as they would if it were a field goal. This would, in certain situations, add loads of tactical intrigue and excitement. The spectacle of a Justin Herbert or Anthony Richardson planting their back foot from their own 40 and launching a moonball would finally give football its own version of the 500-foot home run. It would create a whole new job market for specialty backup quarterbacks who can't do a lot of things well at the NFL level but can chuck the football a mile. And it would do all of this without really compromising the scrimmage football we know and love. The ability to score a single point whenever you wanted would, of course, completely ruin SCORIGAMI, but it's fine. We'd find some other meaningless crap to make a video about. The present-day NFL has less than zero appetite for a proposal like this one, unfortunately. In the decades and centuries to come, though, anything's on the table. Maybe the NFL doesn't exist anymore. Maybe those running the league will take a puritanical approach as baseball did for a long time, refusing to entertain even the most modest of innovations. Maybe in that time the NFL will remain popular, or maybe it'll give way to other football leagues or other sports and return to its small-time roots. Maybe it'll even adopt the Rouge, a Canadian football rule that awards a single point to the kicking team if the opponent is unable to return the ball out of the end zone. But those are only maybes. Going forward, we will continue to simulate as though nothing ever changes but the calendar. Most of the spaces on this board carry very long odds, such as the score we saw at the very beginning of our story, Ravens 47, Browns 42. The combined odds of that one were about 1 in 79,000, implying that we wouldn't have considered it overdue until the 22-40 NFL season. We're bound to get lucky and see scores like this one come way early though, because remember, no matter how long the odds of these scores might be, we get a spin at every single one of these wheels every single game. And in any given week of the regular season, we see around 15 games. Chances abound. We're all Dad Joyner, that old Texas wildcatter who drilled into dry dirt time after time, hoping that one day he'd strike oil. Sometimes we do. Here, we'll revisit some of the SCORIGAMI we've talked about throughout this series to appreciate just how lucky we've been to witness them. We need to stack on a third level to reflect the odds of that time the Seahawks thumped the Cardinals 58-0, as well as Raiders 43, Jets 32 from 1968. That was the Heidi game, which wasn't due until the middle of the 24th century. A fourth level is required for the 1 in 137,000 40-39. The Chiefs-Browns score made possible by Dwayne Rudd legally throwing his helmet, not due until the year 2443. We are now past the time in which most stories from the Star Trek universe are set. All the way up on level 6, the 49-11 game in which Jamarcus Russell was allowed to try the saddest two-point conversion ever. A couple more levels up, the Mike McDaniel game we talked about earlier. 70-20 was not expected until around the turn of the 31st century. The odds would be even longer if 70's dance partner 20 wasn't such a common number. Up another level is Seahawks 43, Broncos 8. Denver's decision in that Super Bowl to go for two down 36-6 saved us from having to wait as long as 31-97 for that one. In 1923, when Racine quarterback Shorty Barr scored an intentional safety on his own team while burning time off the clock, he had no way of knowing he was hanging a 4 on the scoreboard for the first and only time in NFL history. Given that it's the only 4 ever, we have no choice but to use this game itself as the one and only data point from which we can extrapolate the odds of it happening. Stacking on a few more layers reveals the score of the most one-sided beatdown seen in the NFL, the Bears' 73-0 victory in the 1940 League Championship. Climb a lot higher than that, and we find the Bobby Hebert masterpiece Falcons 8, Rams 5. Remember when this was a two-dimensional chart and a grid of 40,000 football games that lasted until the year 2100 seemed like it'd be enough? Well, 8 to 5 is 31 stories tall, and we gotta almost double that to visualize the combined odds of Rams 54, Chiefs 51 in 2018. Its combined odds are longer than 2 million to 1. Finally, we arrive at the rarest score ever achieved. 72-41 Washington Football Glee Club over New York Football Giants in 1966. Those lucky enough to see it in person witnessed a score that was not due until the 14,000s. So there you have it, the unlikeliest score that has happened. How about those that have not? We're already in the 142nd century. Our presupposition that football still looks exactly like it did in the 21st century, touchdowns worth 6 points, field goals 3, safeties 2, 32 teams playing schedules of 17 games lasting 60 minutes is now as absurd as it could possibly get. And if that toothpaste is out of the tube, might as well get our money's worth. 1,425 unclaimed scores remain on this board. All of them are really unlikely. Hundreds of them are absurdly unlikely, including 73-18, which is not due until the year 28,804, according to its combined odds of longer than 7 million to 1. Now, this right here is a good example of a score that I believe might be even more improbable than its combined odds would indicate. See, the thing about 73, beyond the fact that it's only been reached once in NFL history, is that it requires the team to score a touchdown pretty much every time they get the ball. Meaning there's no second half surge here, no relatively calm first stage in which the game is allowed to assume a different character. It's a route the whole way through. Meanwhile, getting to 18 is a consequence of something pretty specific. You chose to kick 6 field goals, or you chose to make a decision to go for 2, neither of which you'd bother with if you were getting clobbered like this. In theory, you could score a couple of safeties to take yourself from 14 to 18, but a team scoring 73 has no time left in the day to get safetied. The only remotely plausible option is that you'd get to 18 by scoring 3 touchdowns and missing all 3 extra points, something that has almost never ever happened. 73 and 18 are simply incompatible scores. They belong to 2 entirely different types of games. Very similar story with 60-11, and before we get there, let's take just a minute to top this thing off as a perfect cube. 200 games wide, 200 games deep, 200 games tall. This is a stack of 8 million football games. Are we good? Do you think you have a solid idea of what 8 million football games looks like? Cool. Onward. At about 10.7 million to 1, we find odds shared by 4 different scores: 60, 65, 66, and 70-11. But lest you get the impression that the most unreachable scores are simply the highest scores, I would like to present to you 11-4, which requires us to stack on a second block of 8 million, almost a third. That one's about 21 million to 1, due by the year 77,000. 8-4 is about 26 million to 1, due by the year 92,000. The year 92,000, I'll probably be dead by then. At combined odds of nearly 34 million to 1, 4-2. It's a little bit beautiful and a little bit revolting that a score this simple, a score that every team begins every game almost right next to, can be nearly impossible to achieve. It's like serving fajitas in a phone booth. You have a crystal clear understanding of what must be done. You simply have no room in which to work, no margin for deviation. You have to score 2 safeties, they have to score 1, no other scoring can happen, and that's the only way it can happen. There's only been one game in the last 30 years in which both teams scored a safety, let alone one of them scoring 2, let alone absolutely no other scoring taking place all game. 2 and 4, of course, are absurdly difficult scores to land on. Flip that 2 to a 5, which mandates all of that, plus exactly 1 field goal, and you have a score that isn't due until well past the 2000th century. We're playing with our food, aren't we? Should we just cut to the quick and visualize the odds of a winning team score that has only happened once ever to a losing team score that has only happened once ever? Alright, before we do, let's reacquaint ourselves with what one block looks like and what it represents. One game, one entire 3-hour battle. 70,000 fans commuting an hour, 2, 3 more. Hundreds of stadium employees working the gates and registers, parking attendants, people out on the street selling $10 t-shirts that run afoul of intellectual property laws. Millions watching from home. That is one block. 64-4, 72-4, 72-64, 73-4, 73-64, and 73-72 have identical odds of 1,285,222,500 to 1. If you believe fully and absolutely in the mathematics of combined odds, look out for these scores sometime between this season and the 4,511,514 NFL season. You laughing yet? We're treating NFL history like a gigantic deck of about 36,000 cards in which the odds of drawing, say, a 73 and a 72 really are longer than 1,000,000,000 to 1. There's no accounting for change here, zero deviation from the idea that NFL coaches and players and rule makers will, for eternity, produce the exact same outcomes they always have at the rate they always have. It's the most absurd, unimaginable, and captivating idea of all, that nothing will ever be different. Anyway, yeah, this does feel a little bit cheap, like maybe by leaning on a pair of one-time occurrences to build this number, we haven't quite earned this Tower of Terror. So, as we cast our attention to one of my favorite unachieved scorigami on the board, I'll be employing some methodology that I think is a little bit more sturdy and responsible. Every game in every season of every era of American football begins at 0-0. Only a stone's throw away from 4, but it's a stone that weighs 100 tons. Yet again, we must dwell upon the November 25th, 1923 game in which the Racine Legion scored only 4 points. And in fact, Alex found that this is one of just 3 instances of an NFL team ever having exactly 4 points at any point of any game, however briefly. The last time this occurred fell on September 17th, 1950, when the Giants scored a second safety on the Steelers to trail 7-4. It came on an attempted fake punt, with the idea being that the Steelers center would snap directly to halfback Shorty McWilliams. The snap missed Shorty by a mile and flew through the back of the end zone for the safety. It was such a bizarre spectacle that one sports writer genuinely wondered whether, for whatever reason, the Steelers scored an intentional safety on themselves. What's amazing about that is that, as you might recall, that second Racine safety back in 1923 that locked in their 4 points was an intentional safety. Further, both plays happened because of a guy named Shorty. Shorty Barr in that game and Shorty McWilliams in 1950. This was not a common nickname. I searched Pro Football Reference for the name Shorty and I came up with 3 guys, and these are 2 of those guys. I do not know what is going on here. A little goof left by the scorigami gods for us to discover, maybe. I guess if you really want to score exactly 4 points, find a guy named Shorty. At any rate, this 1950 bid for exactly 4 points was broken up by a touchdown a few minutes later. 4s are virtually unreachable. If somehow there were a sports fan who knew all about baseball, softball, basketball, hockey, soccer, cricket, bowling, tennis, golf, and yet knew nothing about American football, they'd be confounded as to what exactly is so difficult about putting the number 4 on the scoreboard. But it is virtually impossibly difficult, which brings us to the pure incomprehensibility of the 4-4 tie. To get here, and this is the only way to get here, both teams must score 2 safeties, there can be absolutely no other scoring from either team, and the inevitable overtime must be scoreless. Let's break down that last piece first. Here we see every NFL tie ever, and it's easy to spot when exactly they shut off the faucet. In 1974, the league introduced sudden death overtime, a merciless extra period in which the first score from either team ends the game. This brought ties near the brink of extinction. It was also enormously unfair since the team with the first and best chance to score and win was decided via coin flip. This was clearly a problem that needed solving, and the NFL's response to this problem was downright congressional. In 2010, after 36 entire years of this, the NFL announced the most minor of tweaks. If the team that won the coin flip scored only a field goal on their first possession, their opponent would get the ball and a chance to score, and even then, only in playoff games. It took 2 more years for them to apply this weird, overcomplicated non-solution to regular games as well. 10 entire years later in 2022, they finally said, okay, both teams are guaranteed to get the ball at least once, but only in the playoffs. Regular season games should still be unfair. 3 years later, okay, fine, regular season 2. Entering 2025, the rule book boldly declares, both teams must have the opportunity to possess the ball. Oh, but wait, what if the first team hogs the ball for the whole 10-minute period, which is entirely possible, especially if they're trying to do so on purpose? Guess the other team never gets the ball after all, so never mind all that stuff up there. All this is yet another example of the NFL's preference to endlessly dink around with the rules instead of decisively changing them. At their pace, it would take them quadrillions of years to actually implement some kind of 4-point score that would render this math irrelevant, so I feel confident proceeding. Let's scoop up this data set between 2012 and 2024, in which overtime rules were most similar to what they are now, and keep it to the regular season since playoff games can no longer end in ties. We find 201 games that went to overtime. Just 8 of those overtimes were scoreless, giving us odds of about 25-1. Now to the far more arduous task of getting these teams to 4 points, which again can only be produced by 2 safeties apiece. Working within this same sample of the last 13 years, we find that the odds of scoring a safety in any given game are about 32-1. To score 2 safeties, we square that to get odds a little bit worse than 1,000-1. Now we gotta stop the count. No other scoring in regulation, no touchdowns, no field goals. Within this stretch, there were 72 instances of a team failing to score either, even once. Odds of that close to 100-1. We now combine these odds to find the odds of a team hitting zeros on the clock at the end of regulation with exactly 4 points. 104,071-1. We need both teams to do that, so we square it. And now we need a scoreless overtime. Can't forget about that. We combine those odds and round to the nearest integer, 272,123,481,409-1. So once again, there's one game. Here is our trusty cube of 8 million games. Here are 1 billion games. Here are 272,123,481,409 games. Under the current 285-game NFL schedule, 272 of those games are regular season games in which ties are allowed, and therefore 4-4 would be possible. So those games will take another 1,453,910 years to play. In order to ensure a safe and family-friendly NFL fan experience 1 billion years from now, we will need to develop some manner of technology that can move Earth into a dramatically expanded orbit. As our sun expands, so will the very narrow band of space within which a terrestrial environment can remain habitable. Once it moves beyond us, carbon dioxide will become absorbed and trapped in our oceans, rendering plant life impossible. It's believed that approximately 1 billion years from now, the oceans themselves will evaporate into space. And let me tell you something, trainers all across the NFL are tearing their hair out over this. Hydration is key to avoiding cramps as well as more serious injuries such as ACL tears. It's as true as it ever was. You have to have water if you want to be the champion. So hey, has this lost you? I mean, visually, has it lost you? Because it's lost me. It shouldn't, because I'm the one who drew it, but it has. No matter how many times I zoom all the way into 1 and all the way out to 272 billion, I just cannot hold the former in my heart while also beholding the latter. You and I both know the number this is supposed to signify, but somewhere along this flight, the full understanding of that number just fades. There's a way to preserve it, I bet. I just can't. I'm unable. I think I've surpassed the number I'm capable of visualizing. But it's okay. Limits are everywhere, and it was only a matter of time before I ran into this one, I guess. Speaking of limits. Theoretically, our SCORIGAMI board spreads infinitely outward. We've only spread the net far enough out to catch the most outlying scores that have actually happened, and no further than that. This net does contain a few empty columns, as NFL teams have yet to score 67, 68, 69, or 71 points. There's also an empty row, as no losing team has ever scored exactly 50. Now, we do know that placing a score out in this uncharted territory is entirely feasible. After all, Mike McDaniel's Dolphins could have easily scored 77 a couple years ago if they felt like it. We can step down a rung and look at the precedent of college football teams scoring more than 73 points. This way lies madness, however. Alex has been banging the drum on exploring college football SCORIGAMI, a notion that terrifies me, but who knows, maybe he'll talk me into it one day. Anyway, between 1883 and the present day, college teams have scored at least 74 points an unbelievable 587 times. More than half of them took place before the NFL was even founded, but it still happens several times a year these days. The good manners that rein in the NFL's excesses often do not exist in college ball. Sometimes these people are just plain mean, like in 1968 when Houston led at the half by a reasonable 24-0, only to dump 27 more points on Tulsa in the third quarter, and an incredible 49 in the fourth to hang a nice even 100. The all-time record of 222 points, Georgia Tech's shutout clobbering of Cumberland College in 1916, was entirely fueled by head coach John Heisman's quest for vengeance after they racked up the score on his baseball team. But even if morbidly high scores do come into vogue in the NFL, it seems like they'll probably be confined to the Northeast Territory. If we look at the margins of victory of those 74 and up college games, we see that nearly all of them were completely one-sided. The only one-score game in this entire 587-game sample is this 2018 game that ended A&M 74, LSU 72. This game was only tied at 31 at the end of regulation before college football's special overtime procedures let them score on each other over and over and over until somebody finally ran out of gas. If the NFL ever stops half-measuring their overtime format into oblivion and implements a system like this one, maybe the uncharted territories of the Southeast will be in play. Until then, not likely. But you're more interested in seeing just how big a number on a scoreboard can get, aren't you? So am I. If we stoop down yet another rung, we can see that in high school ball, the greatest number of points ever scored in a game appears to have been 256. Hey, shout out to anybody tuning in from Haven, Kansas today, because in 1927, your high school squad dealt nearby Sylvia what might be the worst beatdown in the history of American football. 255 is the highest value that can be stored within a single byte of memory, meaning that this is perhaps the only time on record that a football team scored so many points that a second byte is required to express the total. And I'm not saying that for no reason. In fact, many years ago when I attempted to simulate how many points can be scored in an NFL game, it appeared to have halted my research into the matter. In the days prior to the Seahawks' 43-8 defeat of the Broncos in Super Bowl 48, I fired up Madden and simulated a nightmare version of the game. I made every Seahawks player 7 feet tall, 400 pounds, perfect at everything. I made every Broncos player 5 feet tall, 160 pounds, awful at everything. Lucky for me that generative AI stinks and doesn't work right, because if it did become sentient, it would probably exact some vengeance upon me for what I had done here. The affair resembled a lawn mowing. The defensive line would sometimes just lie there, broken. They could not tackle, and in fact some of them preferred to stand there and rubberneck rather than place themselves in danger. They could not manufacture a single positive outcome in any phase of the game. Perhaps most tragically, they simply did not know what to do. They did not know how to play. They seemed to not know what a football was. Instead of returning a kick, they would stand there, motionless, until it hit them in the butt on a kickoff somehow, and then they would dance the Charleston. It probably won't surprise you that the Seahawks broke the 255-point barrier 10 minutes into the game. It was at this point, though, that Madden lost its ability to count. I knew the Seahawks had 262 points, but in different contexts, Madden had displayed 255 and 266 points, which are two different kinds of wrong. Some folks on the website Hacker News speculated that this was because, after all this time, deep within the bowels of Madden's programming, they were still using a single unsigned byte, which is not enough to store a value of greater than 255. And while not confirmed, it was supposed that the developer had simply carried over code they'd been using since the very first Madden games released all the way back in the late 80s. Those high school kids in 1927 Kansas had accomplished a feat of mathematics that an Xbox more than 80 years later could not. They correctly counted to 256. I pressed forward after this, continuing the simulation and resolving to track the score with pen and paper. Before long, the score reached 366-0. Then, as the Seahawks attempted a 2-point conversion, the officials threw a flag for false start, which made no sense because I had completely disabled all penalties. I went to the instant replay, hoping for some insight into what had happened here, and I found an empty field. All the players were missing, except for perhaps one. I scanned across the field and noticed a small speck of something laid perfectly neatly at the 50-yard line on top of the NFL logo. I looked closer. It was a player, sort of, lying on the ground with all four limbs bent freakishly upward, teeth frozen in rictus, eyes missing, a uniform with Seahawks lettering but Broncos colors. This is the only time I ever saw him. I attempted to repeat the conditions of this experiment without luck. I have seen no reports of this ever happening to anyone else in any Madden game. The Scorigami gods show each of us different things when we gaze into the abyss. It showed Mike McDaniel the consequences of ingratitude and bad karma. It presented me an unnatural offering, perhaps a gift, perhaps a message, perhaps a threat. I immediately aborted the experiment. But I remain curious. How many points can be scored in an NFL game if there are no concerns aside from what the rulebook allows and what is possible in physical space? Alex and I have spent no small amount of time trying to answer this question, and this is the optimal procedure we have landed on. It's a simple procedure, but it's one so outrageous that it does require a little bit of scene setting. Let's suppose it's the last week of the regular season, Team A is playing Team B, both teams have already secured their spots in the playoffs. Despite this, both teams are incensed at the league. Over what? Who knows? Maybe there's an impending major rule change that's grossly unfair, or a league restructuring that represents an existential threat to them. Whatever the reason, they are absolutely burn it all down furious. So Team A and Team B, in a remarkable alliance, decide to work together to play a football game that lasts so long as to disrupt the league's upcoming playoff schedule. They intend to play a practically endless game, one so long that it must be postponed at 3 in the morning to adhere to city ordinances and resume the next day and the next day and the next day, until this magnificent filibuster of a football game double books these teams that are supposed to be participating in playoff games, and the league's entire postseason schedule grinds to a halt. It's not their specific intent to score as many points as possible, but that will be an outcome. Team A kicks off to Team B to open the game, with the kick dropping into the end zone. A returner from Team B, who moves back into the end zone, hauls in the kick, calmly sets the ball on the ground, and walks away. This is allowed. While in some circumstances it's not legal to intentionally fumble a ball forward, there's nothing impermissible about simply putting it on the ground. So now, a player from Team A runs upfield and falls on the ball to score a touchdown. You may recall that during the opening kickoff of the 1984 Rams-Giants game, we saw what was functionally exactly this, except rather than catching the ball and dropping it, A.J. Jones simply forgot he had to return it, and he let it sit there. Back in the day, NFL rules stipulated that the clock was to start the instant the kicker's foot hit the ball, which is why 9 full seconds ran off the clock during this play. This, crucially, is no longer so. The 2024 rulebook states that in this scenario, the clock does not start until a player on the receiving team takes the ball out of the end zone, which this Team B player does not do. Neither does the clock start when a player on Team A recovers the ball. This play, by rule, and without exception, takes exactly 0 seconds off the clock. Some of you are probably already piecing together what exactly this means, so let's pull some tape to confirm that this does indeed play out in practice how we think it will. In the final minutes of their meaningless final game of the 2016 season, when these new rules do apply, the Jets kick off to the Bills. Check the clock, 3:21 left. The ball sails over the Bills' coverage, and just as in that Rams-Giants game, Mike Gillislee forgets that this is a live ball he needs to recover. The Jets' Doug Middleton capitalizes and falls on it for a touchdown so funny that even the ref is laughing, but check the clock again, 3:21. No time elapsed. The clock never started. So, this is an untimed play that takes absolutely no time off the clock. So, of course, is the subsequent 2-point conversion attempt in which Team A's quarterback can cash in with a naked bootleg. Team B, of course, offers no resistance. Team A is required to place at least 7 players on the line in this play, so they go ahead and line up in a standard formation for good measure. Team B, though, can stand around wherever they feel like, and they should. I'm being completely serious when I say that I think socialization is going to be key to this strategy. Mix it up. Talk to your so-called opponents, too. Hey, you could play entire games of chess with each other using algebraic notation. Just one thought. I know this sounds dumb, but it is absolutely imperative that your players don't get so bored that they quit, because they're going to be doing this many times. After Team A converts the 2-pointer to bring the score to 8, Team A kicks off to Team B. Again. Repeat. Indefinitely. Logically, these two teams could repeat this sequence endlessly to produce 100 points, 1,000 points, 100,000 points, 1,000,000 points, 1,000,000,000 points, and all the while, as explicitly mandated by the rulebook, the clock would remain eternally frozen, reading 15 minutes remaining in the first quarter. So as long as they kept this up, not even a single second of game time would elapse. It is, therefore, well within the realm of legal possibility to score an infinite number of points. In practice, of course, nothing is ever infinite. The only bottleneck here, the only on-field component that is at all a challenge, is ensuring that the ball is kicked into the end zone and that the returner catches it cleanly and sets it down. These players are of course not cyborgs. While this is a very easy procedure they could perform in their sleep, they're gonna goof up eventually. If the ball travels out of the back of the end zone, either because the kicker kicks it too far or the returner fails to haul it in, Team B will be required to trot out their offense and take the ball at the 35. If the kicker were to shank the ball out of bounds in play, the ball is set at the 40. It would probably take 5 seconds of game time to get things back on track via Team B lobbing up an intentional interception and Team A running it back for a pick 6. So, let's run the numbers on this method we have concocted. At a cost of 5 seconds of game time per failure, these teams would be permitted 720 failures in a 60-minute game. Within this framework, if they could properly execute the plan 90% of the time, the score would end up 57,600 to 0. But I think they can do a lot better than 9 times out of 10, don't you? If they could improve their success rate to 95%, that would give them about 115,000 points. It's around here when the payoff for excellence really begins to ratchet up. A 97% success rate would give them nearly 200,000 points, 98% nearly 300,000, 99% puts them over 500,000, and it's through the stratosphere from there. If they could, somehow, correctly execute our method 999 times out of 1,000, that is well over 5 million points. And anything above that, of course, stretches into infinity. But I think that given the increasingly massive number of trials required here, a 99% success rate across some 72,000 touchdowns represents the threshold of what human beings are capable of, so I'm calling it here. 576,000 points. This is, in practice, under present NFL rules, the human limit. Well, you continue to entrust me to visualize this data, and I continue to fail you. Our pitiful little scorigami board is hopelessly incapable of visualizing this. The score of 576,000 to 0 is out here. If our standard scorigami board were the size of a Monopoly board and you set it on the ground, you would need to walk nearly 2.5 miles east in order to reach 576,000. To keep both points in the same frame, if my estimation doesn't fail me here, you would need to ascend to a height of approximately 14,000 feet. Unfortunately, or if we're being honest, fortunately, Rule 17, Section 2, Article 1 of the rulebook seems to afford the NFL commissioner a break glass in case of emergency measure. After a couple days of this, the commish could, correctly, identify this as, quote, outside the accepted tactics encountered in professional football and have the game shut down. But this rule states only that the commissioner could do this, not that the commissioner would do this. We'd simply have to get their cooperation as well. If you're asking me to take a guess, I'd say the odds of a team surpassing 73 points in the next 50 years are around, 30-70. There could be another league-wide scoring explosion like there was in 2018, or a wild talent imbalance between some teams and others, or maybe the next coach in Mike McDaniel's shoes is simply not as nice of a guy. Now, as interesting as it's been to examine the far-flung territories, the very most fascinating unachieved scorigami lives right here on this board. It is, at long last, time to unseal the forbidden score. In 2015, the NFL finally made a rule change that was decades overdue. If on a 2-point conversion attempt the defense made an interception or recovered a fumble, it would be allowed to try to run it all the way back to the opponent's end zone for a score. Since the offense would be awarded 2 points for a score, it made sense to also make this type of score worth 2 points for the defense. The 2-point conversion had suddenly graduated from weirdo bespoke quasi-football play to something closer to normal scrimmage play. As such, they decided it was time to build out more rules to account for the unlikely event of a safety, which in conversion plays are worth just 1 point instead of the normal 2. This would be most likely to happen if a defensive player intercepted a pass, ran it back into the end zone to try to evade tacklers, and then was tackled in his own end zone. This has actually happened a very small number of times in college ball, but in the NFL, where players are less likely to do something dumb like that, it has never once happened in the 10-year history of the rule. Even when it does, it'll unfortunately be completely meaningless in scorigami terms. After all, if the offense scores a 6-point touchdown and then a 1-point safety, it'll give them 7, which is the very most common chunk of points. However, The NFL's rulemakers continue to follow this logic and answer for every possible contingency, including this. What if, on a conversion attempt, the defense scores a safety? Well, it's worth 1 point, same as if the offense scores one. In so doing, it would now be possible for the team on defense to do something that throughout the entirety of NFL history to this point was completely impossible. Score exactly 1 point. Here then is the solution to the mystery that haunts the northwest corner of this board. Since the other team has to score a 6-point touchdown in order to trigger this play in the first place, it is logically impossible for 1-0, 1-1, 2-1, 3-1, 4-1, or 5-1 to ever occur. Following this same logic, 7-1 is also impossible. 6-1 remains technically possible, but let's be clear on what would be required to produce it. On a conversion attempt, a team snapping the ball from their opponent's 2-yard line, or perhaps from their opponent's 15 for an extra point try, would need to surrender a safety of either -85 or -98 yards. Back in 2016, when I first introduced this idea, I asserted that 6-1 was the very unlikeliest score on this board to ever happen. I failed to take the extra logical step required to arrive at the true answer to this question. Soon after, Alex did.
To preface this answer, it's important to truly understand what would be required for Team A that just scored a touchdown versus Team B to then get safetied on the ensuing extra point or 2-point conversion attempt. Assuming the offense doesn't commit like 10 penalties in a row to move the line of scrimmage all the way back near their own goal line, there are really only 2 vessels by which the football could approach their own end zone 85 or 98 yards away to even provide the theoretical potential for a safety. One would be a type of play for which the song Yakety Sax was invented. Imagine a bad snap that sends the ball soaring way beyond its target, and in the race to secure it, the players just keep accidentally knocking it further and further backwards for dozens and dozens of yards until finally either Team A falls on it in their own end zone or the ball trickles out of the end zone. The other would be if Team B, say, blocks an extra point or generates a takeaway on a 2-point conversion and returns the ball all the way to the doorstep of Team A's end zone before fumbling. Some of you may be familiar with this paradigm from Super Bowl 27 when the Cowboys' Leon Lett scoops up a loose ball and rumbles the other way. Lett holds the ball out in celebration before a relentlessly pursuing Don Beebe knocks it away. It goes out of the end zone for a touchback, which also would have been the result had it stayed in the end zone and Beebe pounced on it. So even when a play as colossally rare and unlikely as this occurs, it is still virtually impossible to result in a safety. This is because when a player fumbles into the opponent's end zone, regardless of whether it's an offensive player or, on a turnover like with Lett, a defensive player, and the opponent recovers in there, the fumbling team doesn't get rewarded with a safety, they get penalized with a touchback. For a safety to occur on a Team B fumble near Team A's end zone, basically one of the following 2 scenarios would have to unfold. Either the ball is recovered by Team A outside their own end zone before an inexplicable and voluntary decision to enter it where they're then tackled, or the ball is recovered by Team A inside their own end zone before the player who recovers, in a ridiculously futile effort to salvage their try from over 100 yards away, leaves it, then decides to re-enter where he's then tackled. So aside from an even more farcical scenario in which Team A runs the wrong way and scores a safety on themselves on purpose, that's it. Either a beyond unfathomably cartoonish Keystone Cops type play, or Team B getting control of the ball, returning it nearly all the way to the other end zone, fumbling, Team A recovering, and, finally, voluntarily deciding to enter their own end zone. If ever the football gods were to bestow upon us that sublime 6-1 experience, not just the play of necessarily outrageous shenanigans, but also occurring when neither team had previously put any points on the board, the natural inclination here might be to root for no more scoring the rest of the way. In what would feel beyond surreal, let's get this 6-1 SCORIGAMI box punched out, right? But then I thought further. At first, I'd considered the idea of a team with a 6-1 lead then tacking on one traditional safety to produce a score of 8-1. Then my brain was like, wait, hear me out. What if they tacked on 2 safeties? Toss into that gumbo no other scoring by either squad, and voila! a final score of 10-1.
It's brilliant. 10-1 is one of 19 possible NFL scores that we'll refer to as encrypted scorigami, by which I mean scores that can happen in one and only one way. The highest encrypted scorigami on the board is 11-1, which would strictly require a safety and field goal on top of that 6-1. The two safeties demanded by 10-1, of course, are exponentially more unlikely. So listen, as we explore the odds of 10-1, the numbers are going to get really, really large. Larger than anything we've shown you so far, which is why, in the interest of being as thorough as possible, Alex is going to present not one, but 4 different statistical models. We're going to show every step of his work.
So, what are the odds of such nonsense ever occurring? Well, since the foundational element, let's call it element 1, is a team getting victimized by a safety from either 85 or 98 yards away from its own end zone, let's start with an assessment of the closest facsimiles we've ever seen in reality. To my knowledge, and feel free to educate me in the comments if you know of an even more extreme one, the furthest away from a team's own end zone in which they still got safetied is 53 yards when 95 Michael Strahan went to Philly and unleashed the most explosive block of a punt you'll ever see. It looks like the ball gets shot out of a cannon, launched 40 yards back toward the Eagles' end zone. And on top of all that, it still seems likely at this point to end up either a Giants touchdown or with the ball on the lip of the goal line, only for what appears to be a Vaseline-drenched ball to repeatedly pop loose and meander out the back of the end zone. All that, and it's still 32 yards of real estate shy of what would be necessary from the spot of an extra point, and 45 yards shy from the spot of a 2-point conversion. Oh, and just one other teeny tiny thing. It was a punt, aka a play that's not a relevant facsimile for these purposes. After a touchdown, teams either line up to kick an extra point or to go for 2. The field goal is a relevant facsimile to the extra point, while all pass and run plays from scrimmage are relevant facsimiles to the 2-point conversion. Let's start with the latter. We have NFL play-by-play data covering 1994 through 2024. In that time, while there have been some outrageously majestic intentional safeties like this bad boy executed by 97 Neil O'Donnell in Indy, the furthest away from their own end zone that an offense has ever suffered the humiliation of a legitimate safety on your standard pass or run play was delivered in the '99 NFC Championship game. The Bucs have the ball here on their own 27-yard line when a wayward shotgun snap leads to QB Sean King batting the ball out the back of his end zone. Still 58 yards shy of modern extra point placement and 71 yards shy of the 2-point placement. Also in that time period, there were approximately 795,742 passing or rushing plays in which the line of scrimmage was anywhere from a team's own 28-yard line all the way to the opponent's 1-yard line. About 48 per team per game, with not one of them resulting in the offensive team getting safetied. We can expand the sample further by including all 2-point conversion attempts, extra point attempts, and field goal attempts seen in this era, giving us a sample of 867,460 plays in which something could have unfolded that's at least remotely close to the play we need. Nothing. It simply never happened. We have to resort to straight up pretending that there had been such a safety for the sake of having some sort of positive percentage to play with, a baseline figure for which we therefore know in reality would actually be even significantly lower. So that figure is 867,460 to 1. But even when pretending that one came to fruition, that one out of those 867,460 plays was indeed a safety, and that it occurred not 30 or 50 or 70 yards from the end zone, but 85 or 98, that's of course still not even close to all that we need. To reach 10-1, we need this to be a game where the touchdown preceding the 1-point safety is Team A's lone TD while they can't make any field goals. About 1 in 29 team games meet that criteria. Then Team B needs to score exactly 0 touchdowns, 0 field goals, and 0 regular safeties. About 1 in 80 team games meet that criteria. Therefore, we're talking close to a 2,300 to 1 chance of that element coming to pass. Multiply that by the aforementioned 867,460 to give us odds of more than 1.98 billion to 1. We're already at odds almost as unlikely as a coin flip landing on heads 31 times in a row. And we're still not even close to there. We also need a third and final element for the team that scored the touchdown to also record 2 safeties. In this sample of 1994 to 2024, the odds of scoring a safety in any given game are a bit likelier than in John's 2012 to 2024 sample, but still right in that 32 to 1 range. To get the odds of recording 2 in a game, we then square that, which results in about 1006 to 1. And that brings the odds, even in an imagination land that monumentally belies reality, to 1 in 1,906,499,323,228.6. Which, given our pretending, is merely a number that we know still significantly shortchanges, possibly by orders of magnitude, the much larger number that's inherently nebulous to calculate due to the total lack of precedent of a post-TD safety against the scoring team on the subsequent try. There is a way we can apply at least a dash of credibility to what has necessarily been a completely fabricated supposition for mathematical purposes that one such safety had indeed occurred. And that's by expanding our sample to allow the NCAA to infiltrate it, because during this time, there was a fascinatingly close facsimile of the necessary 1-point safety that occurred at the collegiate level. In a 2017 Louisiana Tech-Mississippi State game, Tech lines up to run a play 94 yards from their own end zone. An errant snap sails way past quarterback Jamar Smith, and in the scrum to secure the ball for what should be a 23 or 24-yard loss, the bounce of the funky oblong ball gets away from him. Then MSU's Maurice Smitherman tries scooping it up, only to fail not once, but twice. At this point, the ball's gone in reverse for 35 yards, Smitherman gets a third shot at it, but instead of just pouncing on it, a teammate joins in and the joint effort knocks the ball back near midfield. Undeterred, Smitherman makes attempt number 4 at the ball, which he also flubs, leading to teammate CJ Morgan's left foot accidentally kicking it another 12 yards toward Tech's end zone. The football is now 57 yards behind the line of scrimmage, where finally Morgan's poised to just fall on the dang thing to cap an epic takeaway. Just kidding, Morgan wants more, winds up kicking the ball with his right foot, giving it another 30-yard jolt before a hustling CJ Powell finally recovers it for the offense at their own 7, a full 87 yards back from where the play started. And it still wasn't a safety. Granted, it covered the negative distance required for a safety on an NFL extra point, but it remained well shy of the necessary negative yardage for a safety on a 2-point attempt, which is the relevant facsimile. But despite that yardage shortfall, since it was at least reasonably close to the type of play we'd need, that gives an element of legitimacy to using a numerator of 1. This play is the head of the pin upon which Model 2 will rest. However, the collegiate infiltration also has implications on the denominator. We have expansive collegiate data at our disposal covering 2000 through 2024, a time period wherein about 38,422 FBS team games were played. That projects to roughly 1.86 million pass or run plays from a team's own 28 all the way to the opponent's 1. Toss in approximately 3.5 post-TD conversion attempts and another 1.5 field goal attempts per team per game across those 2.5 decades, and that takes us up to 2.05 million relevant plays. Combine that with those more than 867,000 NFL plays that didn't produce a safety, and now we're up to a 1 in 2.92 million chance of getting the safety we need, which is element 1. Still need element 2 of no other TDs in the game and 0 total made field goals. About 1 in 26 NCAA team games meet the 1 TD, no field goals criteria, while about 1 in 58 meet the 0 TD, 0 field goals, 0 regular safeties prerequisite. Merging these NFL and college samples, it's a little under a 27 to 1 chance for the former and a little under a 63 to 1 chance for the latter. Combining these odds implies about a 1,693 to 1 shot of such a 1 total TD, 0 total field goal game. That means the odds of such a game also featuring that 1-point safety are about 4.94 billion to 1. Before accounting for the touchdown scoring team also recording exactly 2 safeties. Which brings us to the third element. From 2000 to 2024, safeties occurred a bit more frequently in college than the NFL, with the odds of one in any given game at about 27 to 1. That puts the odds of a safety in an NFL or college game at about 29 to 1. Square it for 2, which is about 819 to 1. And that would bring the odds reflecting a 10-1 game in either the NFL or the FBS to 1 in 4,043,302,022,642.6. To arrive at those 13-figure numbers, we used an analysis based on team games for Element 2, and for Element 3, an analysis based on recording a single safety in a game and then squaring it. If, however, we base the methodology of determining the likelihood of Element 2 not on Team A individually scoring 1 touchdown and no field goals, multiplied by Team B individually scoring no touchdowns, field goals, or regular safeties, but instead on number of games where both teams satisfied their respective requirement, well, that was accomplished in just one of the 8,230 NFL games from 1994 to 2024. And even that one required Philly yanking QB Nick Foles just 1 quarter into their 2017 regular season finale to preserve him for a playoff magic carpet ride. The odds of such a game also featuring Team A getting safetied in their post-TD try, even when pretending such a galactic loss on an NFL play had ever occurred when in reality it never even came close, are about 7.14 billion to 1. And if we base the methodology of determining the likelihood of Element 3 not on a team recording 1 safety and then squaring it, but instead on number of games in which a team recorded 2, just 9 of the NFL's 16,460 team games included 2 safeties, making that about an 1,829 to 1 shot. That cranks the odds to 1 in 13,056,796,667,466.2. Now to loop in college ball, where we have seen a play lose an amount of yardage, at least in the vicinity of what we'd need for the 1-point safety. Of the 20,154 total college football games from 2000 to 2024 that included at least 1 FBS team, just 4 pitted a winner that scored exactly 1 touchdown and no field goals against a loser that scored no touchdowns, field goals, or regular safeties. So combined with the NFL, such a game materializing at either level is about a 5,677 to 1 shot. The odds of such a game also having the lone touchdown being followed by that 1-point safety, which remember is conservatively approximated at 2.92 million to 1, are about 16.6 billion to 1. And we of course still need the 2 safety cherry on top, something that occurred in just 40 of those 38,422 NCAA team games throughout this period, making the joint rate with the NFL about 1,120 to 1. And that methodology brings the likelihood of a 10-1 game in either the NFL or the FBS to 1 in 18,547,286,073,131.6.
18.5 trillion to 1. We already blew the fuse trying to visualize 272 billion to 1. This is more than 50 times that. There is no polygon or legion of polygons that I can draw that would properly communicate a number like that. I have one idea left. I stumbled upon this idea after asking myself, what is the very smallest unit of something I am capable of showing you in the medium of video? That, of course, would be a pixel. So, what I'm going to do right now is place a single white pixel right in the middle of the screen. I'm going to blink it on and off a few times. Make it easier to spot, although if you're watching on a small screen like a phone, you might not be able to see it at all. I've exported this video you're watching with dimensions of 1920 by 1080 pixels, which means that every single frame contains just over 2 million pixels. This video's frame rate is 60 frames per second, which means that within just 1 second of runtime, you are presented with approximately 124 million pixels. That's in 1 second. In a single minute, that's about 7.5 billion pixels. Even that is less than a crumb in comparison to the 18.5 trillion I gotta show you. So, this is what Alex and I are going to do. This video you're watching is the 40th video he and I have collaborated on since 2018. Some of our earliest videos were relatively short and I exported them in smaller dimensions and lesser frame rates, but the majority run at least 45 minutes and were exported at 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames a second. We're just about to simultaneously play each and every one of them at a hyper-accelerated speed because of that, and because their dimensions are so tiny here, you're obviously going to lose out on actually witnessing the vast majority of the pixels, but my hope is that they at least offer a useful illustration of how many pixels, how many things, in the most literal basic sense, we have shown you over the last 7 years. Over to the right, I've set up a pixel counter that'll update once each video's runtime has concluded. I've set up benchmarks reflecting the odds produced by all 4 of Alex's models, approximately 2 trillion, 4 trillion, 13 trillion, and 18.5 trillion to 1. And we'll all watch together to find out whether, across our entire body of work to this point, we have shown you enough pixels to communicate the full measure of all, or any, of these odds. Everybody ready? Okay, let's go. So, what was your favorite pixel? For my money, it's gotta be from the Charlotte Bobcats documentary, 82nd minute, 57th second, 3rd frame, column 1143, row 812. It's a pixel from the hood of Michael Jordan's go-kart that sort of gestures toward being cobalt blue without actually being cobalt blue, in a way that I found very tasteful. And I spent weeks agonizing over that pixel. At one point, I swear, I was really thinking about making it cerulean blue. I know. Can't imagine it either. In the end, though, I was really happy with how it turned out. Anyway, here is the grand total. 14 trillion, 1 billion, 856 million, 819,200 pixels. We didn't quite get to the highest benchmark of 18.5 trillion set by Alex's models, but we did knock down the first 3, which means that if every pixel were a 3-hour football game, we might have, over the course of about 34 hours of video, shown you as many games as would be necessary to see a 10-to-1 game. Again, we might have. I'd like you to consider a scenario. Suppose not 1, but 2 NFL head coaches watch this series. They love it. Specifically, they love this examination of a hypothetical 10-to-1 football game, and they love it so much that one of them tells the other, "Hey, you want to manufacture a 10-to-1 football game on purpose? We could do this pretty easily. You have your guys score a touchdown, then you call a 2-point conversion attempt, then you tell your quarterback to turn around and run backwards all the way down the field and out of his own end zone for an intentional 1-point safety. Then I'll just give up 2 conventional safeties to you. Boom, 10-to-1. Now granted, it will be transparently clear to everybody that I threw an NFL game and you helped me do it. Unfortunately, neither of us will have a job in football ever again. Our careers will be over. We will lose the respect of everybody who ever played for us. Our entire life's work will be rendered meaningless, but it'll all be worth it because there are 2 dorks on the internet who will think it's funny. And then they go and do it. That scenario is wildly, overwhelmingly, exponentially more likely to happen than for a 10-to-1 game to occur organically under the present system of rules. You think the authors of this rulebook understood they were writing a surrealist comedy? Like the best comedians, they did seem to know what to make explicit and what to leave unsaid. Even through their language, they seem to avert their eyes, leaving the words, "what would ordinarily be a safety," for someone else to fully behold the terrifying implications of. It really feels to me that they were too embarrassed to spell it out. But they shouldn't be. I regard it as a thing of beauty that something so plainly impossible is so plainly legally permitted. They may as well have added an article in the rulebook establishing that it is legal for a ball carrier to sprout wings and fly into the end zone, which is just about as likely. These windows and drawers have been pretty serviceable in answering the 5 W's and the H as they concern Scorigami. The board, which Alex and I refer to as the boss chart, gives us the what, the timeline gives us the when, the parts drawer gives us the how, and the field drawer gives us the where. The charts drawer has tried to answer all kinds of questions, including the who, a responsibility it shares with the timeline. None of them answer the why. My personal answer for why is that I find it interesting and funny and a chance to engage in a bizarre rooting interest with strangers, goof around with numbers, and examine the history of a sport I love through a cross-section I never would have squinted through otherwise. But I don't think it's a very important question. You don't really need a why. They are trying to sell you one. I invented Scorigami, but I don't feel like it belongs to me, so I think it's well within their right to offer Scorigami prop bets. I do, at least, feel entitled to tell you what I think about it. If there's one thing you've taken away from all this, I hope it's that Scorigami is completely impossible to predict. It's not even the fun kind of gambling. You know, the kind that lets you feel like you had something to do with it if you won. And it doesn't even give you an excuse to go somewhere cool like Vegas or Churchill Downs. It's essentially a scratch-off ticket, only it's all digital, so you don't even get the fun of going to the corner store and scratching it off with a nickel, or even the ambient satisfaction of knowing that some of the money is going to funnel to public education or the parks department or something. Instead, you sadly poke away at a chunk of Gorilla Glass and these companies silently extract your money and sit on it. You're not really being offered a game, you are being asked to donate your money to a mega corporation. And I can think of few things sadder than that. But even if the least bit of strategy or betting skill were involved, I think it's really important for some things to be allowed to mean nothing. To serve no purpose, teach no lesson, offer no enrichment, generate no money, require no justification. Scorigami itself is no big deal, but it is representative of the type of things that I think we ought to protect and reserve for ourselves. It is an artificial game, housed inside another, much larger, artificial game. It accomplishes nothing and solves nothing. It is bereft of meaning. It is stupid. Can't wait for the next one.